think we can get started. Um, so first off, I'd like to welcome everyone to our UH Career Alumni panel. We are the Brain Student Group, that is myself, Akshay, Alex, and Rafiul, and Yitong as well. Um, we wanted to have this event for all of the PhD students really that were curious about what the next stage was after their PhD. I know there's a lot more uncertainty associated with what's next after the PhD, just because the degree is so unstructured. And sometimes there's a lot of unpredictability that goes along with the next career choice, essentially. So without too much time spent on introduction, my name is Fahim Rashad. I am this year's Brain Student Group President. With me is Alex, who is our treasurer, I believe, and Akshay, who's our secretary, and Yitong is our social media director. Rafiula is our vice president. So the way this panel will go is really briefly, half of it or majority of it really will be questions we've already kind of curated. And the last portion of it, maybe 30, 40 minutes in or so, we'll kind of leave it open to questions. If you have questions you want to ask to our panelists, you can leave them in the chat, and we'll have Alex lead that portion of the panel. So I guess we can get started really. And I'll kind of go in the order that we introduced everybody in the email. So I'll start with Dr. Renee Matthews, and I will introduce her. Dr. Renee Matthews is currently a postdoc in the lab of Dr. Michelle Ward, studying the impact of chemotherapy on cardiac cells at the transcriptional level. She graduated with a degree in biochemistry from the University of Houston, studying cardiac cell fate development. She enjoys working in the cardiac field, and her research interest is understanding ways to improve how heart cells respond to injury. Hi, Renee. Next is Dr. Jesus Cruz Garza. He is a postdoctoral fellow in the Center for Translational Neuroprosthetics and Interfaces at Houston Methodist Hospital. This is actually his second postdoc after exploring brain-computer interfaces and virtual reality at Cornell University. He received his PhD in 2019 from the University of Houston, combining his interest in brain-computer interfaces and the human creative process. He's looking for a future in academia. Hi, Jesus. And lastly, introduce Dr. Ricardo Sosa. He is a recent graduate from the Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering Department, actually this past summer. His research interests are primarily in particle dissolution and computation fluid dynamics. He is 4 months into his first industry role with AbbVie Pharmaceuticals as a senior scientist, working on drug product dissolution method development. Hi, Ricardo. Awesome. I'm glad to have been able to get that out of the way. And with that, I'll ask you all really kind of the first question, let you guys kind of set your stories up a little bit. So kind of give us a little bit of a background and introduction into what you went through in your PhD and what the phase was like for you in transitioning between your PhD and your next job. So I'll start with Renee.
Okay, you can hear me, right? So, let's see. The phase was fuzzy for me. I actually defended really early in January, and I swear I took 2 months to recover. In the meantime, during that, I was still doing graduate school teaching, and I started attending a lot of online conferences so I could find a lab I wanted to join. I'm restricted in where I want to join, so that narrowed down the choices for me because we weren't as flexible for moving right now. And so I lucked upon Dr. Michelle's lab, or I call her Michelle, so I'm not used to calling her Dr. Ward. And after some brief interviews over Zoom, we found that we were simpatico in a lot of the things we're studying or interested in. And I bring cardiac differentiation to her lab in a reliable manner and a lot of curiosity. And she gets to help train me on dealing with RNA-seq data. So overall, the transition was smooth. I mean, I've heard some horror stories, I guess. So it was nice to be able to go and find a position that was around my interest. And yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you for that brief intro. Jesus, would you like to go next?
Yes, so my name is Jesus Cruz Garza, and I was a PhD student at the University of Houston. I graduated in December 2019. And through one of the projects that I collaborated with, that professor that I collaborated with, he then moved to Cornell, and he asked me to join his lab as a postdoc there, to start his lab and go through that process with him over there. And he was an architect and an expert in virtual reality. I had been working in brain-computer interfaces, and in fact, with Akshay here and other members of the lab, we developed this, what I thought was a pretty cool brain-computer interface to control a room with brain activity. So the opportunity at Cornell was to try to explore this further and not only control a room with brain activity, but control elements in virtual reality. Which has a lot of potential right now as well, especially with the boom in neurotechnologies. So that's why the opportunity was so interesting. And it was, in fact. So in my case, that part was very smooth as well, the transition from PhD to postdoc. And it came through a project in collaboration with a person that I already knew. After a year and 8 months, 10 months, I decided to move on to a second postdoc position, and that transition was not so smooth. I actually I was in a maybe in a gray area as well, in which I was also considering moving to industry, maybe again because of the boom in neurotechnologies and new companies coming up with this type of technology, the big 10 companies in particular. And while I was doing that, while I was considering also other postdoc positions, and I found one that caught my interest here at a new center for translational neurotechnology at Houston Methodist. Um, so I had this decision to make if I wanted to go to industry immediately, or pursue a future in academia. So it was a lot of searching there. At the end, I felt comfortable with my abilities in academia and the things that I can get from it, collaborations and exposure to the forefront of technology there. So I decided to go with that. And so I'm exploring that possibility right now, and I'm excited for hopefully a more extended future in academia. However, I do not discard the possibility of maybe in the future also exploring industry.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Ricardo, would you like to share your journey and your transition with us?
Yeah, sure. Um, so I actually, just like Fahim, I did my undergrad at the University of Houston and pursued my PhD at the University of Houston. And the primary factor there was my advisor, my research advisor. He was just awesome. And I was like, I can't gamble on a whole new advisor and whole different experience. So I decided to stick there, and I'm happy I did. I got the opportunity to work in the nano fab for quite a while. So I did some fabrication for microfluidics. My graduate research was focused on crystallization, primarily with applications in kidney stones and oil and gas industry. But I looked a lot at the crystal growth and dissolution mechanisms. And towards like maybe my second or third year, I was pretty set on industry. And so finally, when I was in my final year, I began aggressively applying to industry positions, and it was not the best year to be applying for industry positions. So it was quite tough. I wasn't restricted in terms of where I had to be or what particular industry I wanted to go into. I have many interests, so I cast a pretty wide net, and I actually only got interviews for pharmaceutical companies. So I guess that was kind of like a sign. And yeah, once I got the offer with AbbVie, it was to work in their dissolution group. And I initially applied because I do a lot of dissolution work in my graduate research. When I interviewed, it was totally different from what they were actually doing, but they liked that I had the fundamentals that can still be applied. The transition, I guess the biggest shock was the move. I've been in Houston my entire life, and now I'm just north of Chicago. And so that was, I think, the biggest shock there. But I think I've adapted pretty well to working in industry. It's very different from academia, and personally, I like it so far. There is a big push to still take on research projects. They do have to have some value added to the company, to the business, but they're interested in a lot of fundamental research. So I'm currently working on some CFD simulation work to model some of the apparatuses that are used to test dissolution of pharmaceutical drugs. So I'm enjoying that very much right now. And they even offered me to do a rotation in other groups, which is not conventional for this particular company and this particular department. So I thought that was a really good opportunity. And so far I've been learning a lot in these rotations. So that's it.
Awesome. It's great to hear from all of you, because you guys are all from such different backgrounds, and you've got such unique experiences. It could be really helpful for everybody to listen in. So I guess I can kind of get started with a few more specific questions for each of you. Again, I'll start with Renee. So in the field you're currently working in, and I'll kind of give you a few things to kind of go over. So in the field you're currently working in, how challenging was it to find a job? One, did you end up working in a field you initially planned to work in? Two, and what were your most motivating factors that led you to the position you've now held or now hold? Three.
Uh, I had a rare situation where I actually only applied to one location. It was my first postdoc application. I was getting ready to send out more, but so for me it was unusual, and it was just an easy slide into a job, partially because I had cardiac differentiation background skills and cell culture skills, and I'm not necessarily interested in academia, but there's so much more I want to know. And I thought this would be a great position to develop some more professional skills and really, I don't know, examine a whole new lab and a whole new system. They are an education, or UTMB is education institution, but they don't have undergrads. So that it's a completely different environment because of that. We just have our newest rotation student coming in, and she has never even done something like qPCR, which is pretty standard for biology and biochemistry. And it's fascinating to just, hey, I can show her this, or I can just go do my own work. That is the other part I like about being a postdoc, is I get to put my big boy pants on and finish all my projects, and I know how to make cool little presentations. I give a presentation at least once every 2 weeks right now on various aspects. We're collaborating with another lab who does something called oligo paints, where we're trying to capture the 3D structure of the genome, during different cell states. So it's just exciting to learn new things and expand your horizons. So let's see. What other? Yeah, that's my whole job thing.
Awesome. Awesome. Jesus, same question to you. How hard was it for you to find a job in the field you're currently working in? Did you end up working in what you initially planned to work in? And what were some of the motivating factors that led you to those positions?
Right. So again, I would like to divide my my answer in two sections. First, in my first opportunity, and then the second one. In the first opportunity, it was directly related to one of the projects that I was working on. So it was a continuation of that and expanding it towards virtual reality. So in that sense, it was also my first and only application as a postdoc. Um, and and I did end up working in something that I was trained in and that I think I was good at. Um, um, but going into a new lab, a lab that was starting, it also required setting it up from the equipment that we were going to get, computers, the team that we were put together, and everything. So, and that was something that I was not necessarily expecting. So that was an extra challenge there. Um, and so the equipment that I was used to work with, we did not necessarily have it over there. So that was a big challenge, and also to manage expectations, being that I work in a field that is very technical. I study brain signals and try to translate them to useful commands, and sometimes it doesn't work perfectly, right? And if you're working with a multidisciplinary team, I had to learn how to communicate and manage expectations from a multidisciplinary team in that sense. So that was a big challenge. Um, and then the second part of the question, I mean, of my trajectory here, when I was transitioning to another postdoc position, um, that that was a little bit harder. Also, probably because of the pandemic situation and because I work with humans, and it's difficult to do experiments at this particular time. Um, but at the end, and I wanted a different experience in a more clinical setting because I'm interested again in working with humans and making this technology of brain-computer interfaces work. So I was applying to different places. At the end, I did have, so I applied maybe what, over 60 applications, and these were not like short, simple applications. They were a cover letter, a resume specific to that particular lab or institution, because I was also applying to industry. So I had a cover letter, a resume, a CV specific for industry and academia, and also for each position. I had to adjust them that way. In the end, I did get 3 or 4 interesting opportunities, all from academia at this point. And interestingly enough, all of them said that my profile stood out because of the website that I have, because I maintain a website with the job that I do, because it's very visually interesting, I think. And so yeah, and getting feedback from industry, they were looking for very particular skills that I had not necessarily developed, and I'm not necessarily interested in so much in developing. One of them in particular was to learn a specific programming language for the specific kind of job. So that I found that interesting too. And then if I'm working currently in what I was expecting to, not really, because I am working with animals as well, not only humans, but also animals. So I'm working with a neurosurgeon, and so I have to learn how to do neurosurgery as well in animals. I have to do electrokinesis, electrokinetic delivery of drugs as well, which is not what I was trained for, but I will be trained on here. So not necessarily, but I'm learning new skills. And if I'm a postdoc, I think that's a good opportunity to keep exploring, as Renee was saying, this new skills. And there was a third part of your question?
It was, what were the most motivating factors that led you to your positions?
Okay. Yeah, the most motivating factors were the possibility of learning new skills, and particularly for me, the possibility of being at the forefront of technology development. Um, most of the most impactful research technologies are developed with public money through public institutions or through research institutions. And so for me, that was particularly interesting. Also, if in the future I want to transition into industry, maybe that's a possibility. I feel like being in academia, publishing papers can improve my visibility in the scientific world and also in industry.
Awesome. Thank you. Ricardo, I have a question for you, and it's really the same question. So in the field that you're working in now, how challenging was it for you to find a job? Did you end up working in what you initially planned or hoped to work in? And again, what were the most motivating factors for you in transitioning into that role?
Yeah, so I found it quite difficult to find a job. Like I mentioned before, I think that's primarily due to the pandemic. The work that I was doing in graduate school would have put me in a really nice, a very easy transition to some specialty chemicals companies or oil and gas. And that was, for me, it was attractive because it was going to be here in Houston, you know, and I wanted to stay in Houston. All my family's in Houston. And then when I realized that, okay, that's not going to happen. And I started getting only interviews for pharma, then I was like, okay, then, you know, sort of accepted that a little bit more. And it's not like I didn't want to do that. It's just that I knew that involved me moving. And, you know, when I first started doing research at U of H, I worked on a kidney stone project, and I kind of got this, you know, initial idea of, okay, it would be awesome to work in pharmaceutical industry. And so I always had that in the back of my head. And once I was interviewing and I was getting some pretty positive feedback, that's sort of what motivated me. That's sort of what like kept me going is, after so many applications, there were actually people that were calling me back and they, you know, actually wanted to talk to me and to hear from me. That was one of the biggest factors. But yeah, I think if I had maybe if I had a more focused outlook back then, I probably would have been able to you know, target these positions a little bit better and had a better, you know, success rate. But at the time I still was kind of like, you know, not all the way in. I had like 1 foot here, 1 foot there. And that I think made it a little bit tougher. Was there some other question that I didn't answer?
I think you pretty much covered most of it.
Okay.
Great. Thank you, guys. I'll get to this question again, back to Renee, really quickly. I know you said you only had one position you applied to, but how did you find that position, or what strategy did you adopt to find these types of positions?
Well, I did start with, you know, LinkedIn, and I was talking with my fellow colleagues about how to apply, where to apply. I've had a professional job before, and becoming a scientist was a career change. So I was very familiar with the process of hiring. And really, what I needed to do was just choose how much of what I had been doing that I wanted to do. I found this position through a conference. I was late to the presentation and heard the tail end of her presentation. And she had presented on hypoxia and cardiomyocytes. And, you know, I went and pulled all of her papers and read them all. And then I had questions I had to ask her. And just because I was curious. So it was that kind of start. I introduced myself in a basic email, did the formal email, and then they invited me to apply, and I did the formal application process. I mean, applying for a job is not a quick process. It's not like a fast food restaurant. It does take time. And even though I know it takes time, I still, by the end of 3 months, I was like, come on, I just want to get in the lab. So the other thing I knew I was going into is this was a fairly new lab. And it was important to me that this lab have some level of funding for a couple of years, um, especially when they're new and startup. And it needed to be overlapping with my skills, but also expanding. So I've never studied cardiotoxicity and chemotherapy drugs. So that is the aspect and the avenue that I will be investigating. And it seemed to work. It was just, so that is basically how it happens.
Awesome. Interesting. How about you, Jesus? What strategies did you adopt? You said 60 applications.
Yeah, probably more. Yeah, and it took a long time, like to write each one. Yes, I think over 3 months for sure. Yeah. Um, what strategies did I use? I started with LinkedIn, and I did get yeah, that I think LinkedIn was my primary source. And then asking some of my friends, actually included here, I was also looking into social media from labs or people who are interested in the topics that I'm interested in and who were advertising positions as well. Because I learned that on LinkedIn, there's a charge for the posting of a position there, which I did not know. So some labs that just didn't want to pay that fee, they were more active on social media. So that was a good tip as well. And I also contacted people there. And the last, and also that I found surprisingly effective, was to look into labs that had cited my research or had something interesting related to what I did, and email the professor. I emailed the professor, tell them, hey, I'm interested, I do this and that, and I see that you do this and that, and I think we can work together to get this new idea working. So out of 60, 70 applications that I did through LinkedIn, maybe 2 or 3 were responsive. No, maybe 4 or 5. And from those, maybe 2 or 3 were generally interested. And by emailing professors directly or people that I knew that we had something in common directly, I think I got maybe 50%, if not more, 80% or more that responded, and 50% or more that responded back with a counter idea, like, hey, maybe I don't have funding, but we can do this in the future, or things like that. So I found that surprisingly effective. And social media, that's what let me know who was working on what, like the new trends and developments.
Awesome. Thank you. Those are all great tips. Ricardo, I had the same question for you as well. What strategies did you use to look for your jobs or job opportunities?
So my first, the first thing that I did was I just did a quick search, chemical engineering PhD jobs, and just to see what, who is hiring, what companies have positions open, and then I would filter through them and see which positions had sort of like skill sets that I fit. And I applied a lot through LinkedIn. Sometime like towards the middle of my search, I started reaching out to people. At first, I was like very, very like reserved about that. Like I don't know. I felt I didn't feel confident and or comfortable. But I think that's the best thing you can do, is reach out to people that you know. I guess like I almost like felt like a little bit of shame, and I was like, at one point I was like, this isn't working, so I'm just gonna reach out to people and talk to them, and that helped. So I reached out to one of my group's alumni. She is working at GSK, and through her, I was able to get an interview at GSK. I went through all 3 rounds of the interviewing process. Unfortunately, I didn't get that position, but it served as really good practice still, that is actually the first official interview I ever had. Before that, I only had one interview with Sun Products, which got bought out like before that internship even started. And that one, I didn't even interview. They just called me. They just wanted to, they just brought me over. So this GSK interview was the first time I ever actually interviewed. I learned a ton from that. And I kept a log for all the positions that I applied to. It was a lot. I applied to a ton of positions. So it was kind of discouraging to see that you either don't get a call back or you just flat out get, a rejection. I think the worst is when you interview and then you just don't hear back from them. That's annoying, but that's how it goes. But yeah, reaching out to people that I know and applying aggressively and keeping a record of all the applications I submit. Anytime I did get an interview, I'd follow up 1 or 2 weeks later, to thank them and to let them know that if they need any questions that I can answer for them, that I'm available and all of that. One thing that I found is, especially with pharma, a lot of the companies, they wanted people now. And I was trying to set something up for when I defended, which was like in 5 months. And they were like, we really need somebody right now. So that was one of the hurdles that I had to deal with. But yeah, this company, I think, it's important to be able to match your skill set to the position. You need to be a good fit, but sometimes it's not that apparent from just the job posting. My skill set, it doesn't really fit with the position that I apply for, that I currently hold. They hired me because of the fundamental research that I did in grad school. They wanted somebody that was doing this fundamental research, and they really want to boost that part of their science. So that's why I was hired. I'm still learning all of the core processes that they do. And so sometimes it's not so cut and dry. Sometimes it can be a little bit, it's variable sometimes.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I think we have several questions actually that came up in the chat and from our audience. With respect to time, I know some of you, or at least one of you, needed to leave at around 8, or possibly, if everyone's okay, we'll keep going. Is that a thumbs up from everyone for now? Okay, awesome. All right, then I may, if Alex is ready and willing, to let you take the lead of the next portion. We actually have quite a few from the chat, so we might as well start now, I think.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, these first two actually were for me. So the first one's for Renee. So I was in an industry for 5 years before coming back to grad school. And, I still struggle with whether or not returning to industry is something I want to do. So I guess, well, what keeps you in academia, or are you planning eventually to return to industry?
Well, actually, I came from academia in a way. I taught public schools.
Okay.
So when I say career change, it was a big career change. I still hold a public school teaching license too in the state of Texas. So I can teach anytime I want. No. But I did not necessarily want to teach. That is just a skill I have acquired over time and something I like to do. So when I came back, I'm letting my curiosity guide me. I don't know exactly what I want to do when I grow up. That's always been my case. And so what I've tried to do is eliminate the things I don't want to do. And that's where I'm at right now. I mean, nobody wants to write grants, I'm sure. Well, actually, there are people that do. I don't like messing with money. I'd rather have someone else handle that. So I'm not interested in necessarily being a PI, but being a research scientist in a lab and collaborating, that is totally my interest. I like being able to nerd out on my little topic and know everything about it and then demonstrate that knowledge to the group so that we can move forward and ask different questions. And that's where I'm looking. I just sat down and did my first yearly goals for the next year, what I want to do and things like that. And one of them, it really is just presenting and publishing. Those are generally what you want to do in your first couple of years of a postdoc. It's interesting, Jesus, you were talking about a second postdoc. That is, I know that is a thing. I can't imagine changing right now, which I think that's a good thing. I haven't grown out of the position yet, and I don't plan to for another 6 months at least. But there isn't a clean line between academia and industry, especially if you're in the Houston area with all of the different little companies coming up, especially in the biomedical fields. It really will depend on who you're talking to and how involved you get. You have to get yourself out of your lab and you have to talk to people that are not even in your degree specialty and say yes to people like Fahim when he calls. Hey, I want to learn this. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Because then it gives you more of a spark. You can see what they're interested in and know if you like that or not. Does that make sense? And
Yeah.
so hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, thank you. Okay, yeah. So Ricardo, I have a question for you. Again, I came back from industry, and one of the things I really liked about grad school is like the relative freedom you have in pursuing your own personal research. You have at least some leeway in what you want to do. So you're back in industry, and you mentioned something like where they do rotations. How do you feel about, or how much do you enjoy the industry version of research as compared to the academic side?
I think I'll tell you what I dislike the most, and that is the bureaucracy that you have to go through. In grad school, right, you start, like, it could be your first day, and as long as you have your safety trainings, you hop in and you just start mixing stuff up.
Okay.
I started in July, and I'm still not fully trained in my group's core capabilities, so I still can't run those experiments. In pharma, there's what industry did you come from, or
oil and gas, basically.
Okay, so there are GMP labs and there are GSP labs, and GSP is basically grad school. That's like you're doing everything as best as you can, but you're not documenting everything and everything's audited. That's GMP. I work, my group is a primarily GMP lab. The rotation that I'm doing, I'm part-time in a group that is GSP, so I get to do stuff there. And one of the things that is one of the analytical techniques that's used most in pharma is HPLC, and I didn't know any HPLC. So that's why, it's another thing that kind of surprises me. Why did they hire me? Like, that's what they use the most, and I have never used this technique. They gave me this opportunity to do this rotation to learn HPLC from this group that all they do is HPLC. They're like a service group. So that's been really nice to be able to learn that from them, and to also be able to get in the lab and do work. So that I like to do that, and because it's a GSP lab, I can do that there, but in my actual group, I can't really do anything yet. So that's what I dislike the most. I am gonna have the opportunity to do a few more rotations, and this is all because my boss just thought of this idea of like, hey, he's new, he doesn't know very much, let's send him on a rotation trip.
Yeah.
And so I'll be doing another rotation beginning of January. And it's not full-time rotation. So I'm still, in my actual group doing a few things like the simulations. I can do all of that on the computer. And then barely starting to put together some study proposals for certain projects. And then I'm going to have some analysts help me do the experiments until I get fully trained. So it's mostly like the organizing things or scheduling everything that can be a little bit, that'll set you back.
Frustrating.
But, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the next question we had posted online, I think Jesus, you're probably in the best position to answer something like this. So to stay in academia and become a university professor, what do you think are the key factors for choosing a postdoc position?
The key factors for choosing a postdoc position, or looking towards academic professor position?
Well, for specifically, if you eventually want to become a professor, what are the factors, in how you chose a fellowship, given that's your path?
I see. Okay. Yeah, this is something that I actually thought a lot when I was looking for postdoc positions. If I want to become a faculty member, what are the other skills that I need? Definitely writing grants. That's super important. And so I want more experience there, particularly in clinical settings. That's why I chose a hospital. But also many of the positions that I was interviewing at, and many of even the industry positions that I was not a perfect fit for, or that I needed a few more skills to get into that, they required some skills from basic neuroscience that I did not have. One of them was, for example, not only doing experiments that can work in engineering wise, but in clinical trials and even in animal models and things like that. So I figured if I wanted to become a faculty member in the future, I pictured what kind of academic environment I'd like to be in. It turns out that this new collaboration between Rice and Methodist fits very well with my skills. But one of the things that I was missing, and that at least could help me develop more as a scientist, was to do basic neuroscience from neurosurgery perspective and clinical trials particularly. So that's what motivated me to look into this particular postdoc, looking towards a faculty career in the near future.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of people describing that you need to get the skills for the future career that you want. So I think that makes sense. So I think this can be for anybody that comes up with an answer. So what is something most people don't tell you when you start looking for a job or a postdoc fellowship after a PhD? So that's free for all.
I think what surprised me the most at the beginning, while we're starting this process of looking for other opportunities, is that the applying itself, it's a lot of work. I felt like it was a part-time job in itself. It took half my day, like after work, to do this specifically, and a lot of energy and a lot of interviews. And so that was surprising, and I wish I knew that before. I would have applied before with more time, and maybe have at least having that in my mind would help me not feel all the time tired and thinking that I have to do this extra work, because it is extra work.
Okay, all right, thank you, Jesus. So here's a question again for Jesus. You just mentioned this. I mean, you mentioned that grant writing experience generally is really important for, if you want to become a faculty. How important was it to get the current position that you have, having already had experience grant writing? Did they look for extensive experience grant writing when you were applying for these positions?
No, they did not look for extensive experience with grant writing. It helps if you have some. And in my case, I had participated in some NSF future faculty fellowships that gave me some experience with that. But I was open with them that I myself had never written a grant on my own or gone through that whole process by myself. because that's not something that usually is expected from graduate students, right? Or PhD students. So I was just honest and open about it, and it was one of my goals to learn. And usually, at least for postdoc positions, faculty members are interested in people who are willing to help them write these kinds of grants. And if I want to become a faculty member in the future, it helps if I have, for example, a K-99 or something like that that gives me funding as a junior researcher.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. So let's see. For Ricardo, so you transitioned from academia to industry. How critical do you think it was to have experience or internships during your PhD? Did you feel you didn't get positions for that reason, or if you have experience?
If you have an internship and you want to go into industry, if you want to go into industry, internships are your friend. They are important. A few of the people that I work with got into AbbVie because they had done internships with them before. So that is very important. If you can do it and you want to go into industry, definitely go for it. I know sometimes your advisors they want you to focus on the research there. So that might be a little bit of a battle. But if industry is your ultimate goal, that's a battle that you should go through. I didn't do any internships throughout grad school. So I think that would have helped me a ton.
Okay. Yeah. That makes sense. Let's see, just a couple more questions here. Let's see. I think we may have finished them all here. So I guess we might be landing on the closing questions. So the first closing question is, we're in the pandemic period now. What advice would you have for someone that is transitioning to industry or out of their PhD program generally, during a pandemic? And I think all three of it, have experienced this exact experience. So, Renee, could you start us off?
My first experience with, the first part of the pandemic, I was already writing. So once the getting supplies is turning out to be the hardest thing right now. So being conservative with your tips and things like that, because is important in that. It was very surprising. I don't know how that works in industry. I am sure they buy a little bit larger numbers of supplies and that makes a difference, but it can really, I have my protocol requires a 60-day run. So if I started today, in 60 days, I'd complete one of the experiments. And that's just due to the nature of differentiation. And sometimes it's really hard to balance when you need certain supplies. And that is, one of the things I didn't know, I guess, that I would really think about in grad school, or that's not something I thought about in grad school at all. We always had supplies, and if not, there was leftover supplies in the lab next door, and that's been the biggest hurdle right now. And just the other thing, I think, I don't know how many people here it will apply to, but getting work visas and getting any sort of documentation, that is a huge hurdle that a lot of my friends have had to deal with. And knowing that that's coming, a lot of people, you always need to have your eye on the ball 6 months after you've finished what you want to do to make sure some of that is in line. Otherwise, you can find yourself in weird positions where I had a friend her first offer for a postdoc was something like $35,000 instead of industry standard, which is around 55. Like NIH does that in their fellowships. And excuse me, kitty cat. And knowing that they're people who are on immigration visas and things like that, they can risk being part of the predatory system out there of employers. And so I caution anybody who has to deal with that to keep your eye on the ground and know that there are rights and you don't have to accept substandard pay for a PhD just to maintain a visa here. There are other things to do. And it's one of the things that really bugs me, knowing that there are, in the medical center alone, there are doctors who are MD PhDs from other countries that are only making 40,000 right now because they are pushed into some weird postdoc position so that they can get their visa. And so, I don't know, I'll step out from my soapbox. It outrages me when people have to do that.
Well, yeah, thank you, Renee. Yeah, I appreciate the sentiment. Ricardo?
Yeah, can you repeat the question? I forgot.
Well, just generally for someone transitioning out of their PhD program during a pandemic, do you have any advice for pandemic related, advice?
So maybe probably start writing your dissertation as soon as you possibly can, because that, I think I with interviewing and stuff like that, everything just piles up and you think you have so much time, and then all of a sudden, you have to meet this deadline in a few weeks, and it gets very, very chaotic. And scheduling your defense, some professors are, better about scheduling ahead of time than others. So just making sure that you can get your committee all sorted out. I think that's important. What else? I think one of the biggest things, making sure you know where you're going to print your dissertation, because I had a lot of issues with that. And I went to a printing shop. So that was an unnecessary headache. Yeah, I guess I don't have too much more with
that's good.
Transitioning out.
Yeah, thanks, Ricardo.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus.
Yeah, so in the pandemic, at least for me, I found that the job market was difficult. It was very difficult. In some cases, as Renee said, with weird salaries offered, and especially to international people. I'm an international person myself, and I did go through that struggle of immigration and all those things, which adds another layer of pressure, right? So my recommendation for people who are transitioning out of a PhD right now is to do everything with extra time. Like if you need to apply for extra documents or immigration, and they say that the soonest you can apply is 6 months before you graduate, start preparing the documents 7, 8 months before and submit it as soon as you can, because there are delays. The same with applying for positions either in academia or in industry. At least, well, specifically for academia, for an academic institution, it usually takes a month or more just to do the processing. So after they accept you, just to do that processing of getting you into the system and all of that takes a month. So don't wait till the last minute. Start with a lot of time before.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Jesus. All right, Fahim.
Yes. All right. We're nearing the end. I'll open the floor to anybody that wants to ask any other questions. But if no other questions, Maybe I'll wait a little bit. I think we checked the chat. I don't think we have any more questions, do we? Okay. Yeah, I think we're good for now. Thank you all so much for joining. We really appreciate you giving us some time. I know there are a lot of people that are, a few at least here, that are in that transition stage, and a few of us will be very soon. And so we really appreciate your time. Thank you again for joining, everyone. And with that, take care. Bye-bye.